I am currently in the ancient forgotten city of Angkor. 900 years ago, this was once the largest city on planet Earth, and even though the city may now have been reduced to nothing more than an overgrown jungle, there are still over 1,200 impressive temples still standing in this area to this very day. The biggest of all of these temples is Angkor Wat. Early Western visitors were so awestruck by this structure that they believed it must have been built by Alexander the Great or the ancient Romans. This temple is perhaps one of the greatest architectural wonders ever created by human hands. This long-forgotten city, known as the Land of the Gods, is one of the greatest treasure troves of art, archaeology and history. The Temple of Angkor Wat is grander than anything left to us by either the Greeks or the Romans, and the temple towers above the Taj Mahal and contains more stone than the pyramids of Giza. One would even go as far to say that Angkor Wat is a masterpiece, an entire civilization's greatest body of work, which has gone on to echo through the centuries. Speaking of bloody masterpieces though, in today's society that seems to have become a term that is just dissed out and overused willy-nilly. I am even seeing things as trivial as bloody video games being labelled as masterpieces on a regular basis. So yeah, Skyward Sword is a bloody magnum opus apparently, up there with the Great Pyramids and the Sistine Chapel and the Mona Lisa. Whilst I agree there are plenty of brilliant games in existence, to label any of them as masterpieces, whether it be subjectively or not, is bloody ludicrous. By doing this you are simply watering down the term. The latest game which has been getting on my nerves for having this label attached to it is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now I have played through this game and I can fully appreciate that it is an above average game, but a masterpiece like the Taj Mahal or the statue of Zeus? Psh, an absolutely absurd claim. Since I am in the presence of a true masterpiece today, in the Land of the Gods surrounded by temples, I thought that today would be a perfect time as any to talk about the Legend of Zelda series. In regards to what parts of the series I shall be covering, I am going to be talking about why I prefer the critically flawed game of Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link over the apparent modern day masterpiece The Breath of the Wild. Obviously this video is 100% subjective and purely based on my personal tastes and opinions, so this video I suppose is why Zelda 2 is better than Breath of the Wild for me personally, rather than for anyone else. Before we get this underway, I would like to say that I have noticed a vast amount of similarities between these two titles, so I thought I would document those similarities and compare and contrast what I like and what I don't like about them. I find it interesting that both these games took such similar routes, however both games were received by the media and the public in such different ways. What a difference 30 years makes, I suppose. Let's start off by talking a bit about Zelda 2. It is often looked at as the black sheep of the franchise, and overall fans have very mixed feelings and opinions towards this game. The main criticism of the game is that it is different to the others and fails to follow the same tropes as other games in the series. Zelda 2 featured a shift in direction from its predecessor and has completely different gameplay mechanics. Most games after Zelda 2 feature more in common with the original Legend of Zelda game than they do with its sequel. So essentially, the first problem that Zelda 2 has is that most people will not even give the game a chance, simply because it does not play in the same way as other Zelda games. However, from my experience with the game, if you embrace the differences, there is a lot of fun to be had with this one. Zelda 2 is a side-scrolling action platformer, with the focus placed on combat rather than the traditional top-down Zelda game. Well, this is the case apart from when you are traversing the world map of Hyrule, where it returns to the original Zelda perspective. Whilst on this map, enemies appear in swarms of 3 and move to intercept you, and if they make contact, you're cast into battle. These battles are side-scrolling affairs in which you clash against Ganon's forces. Zelda 2 also has more in common with the RPG genre. The game goes as far as to reward Link with actual experience points and allows him to level up after battles. Link can even cast magic spells in this one too, like he is a bloody character in Final Fantasy or something. Personally, I love these changes to the Zelda formula, and with the addition of experience points, it made every battle feel more worthwhile. In the majority of Zelda games, half the time I simply find myself walking past enemies, as I have little incentive to kill them. However, everything I achieved whilst playing this Zelda game feels significantly more rewarding than it does in others. So I suppose I really like these new elements within the game, and it does make me wonder if most people have actually even tried to play this game properly, or have simply taken on the opinion of others instead when denouncing this game. Breath of the Wild, unlike Zelda 2 on the other hand, has been heavily praised from the beginning. Like Zelda 2, the game also features the departure from a traditional Zelda formula. This time, however, people are loving that the rulebook has been torn up, and that many of the generic conventions of the Zelda series are missing in action. 3D Zelda games previously have always been a fairly linear affair. It is a gaming formula in 3D Zelda games in which was established in the Ocarina of Time in 1998, right the way up until the Skyward Sword in 2011. Personally, I was comfortable with this and enjoyed it. I knew exactly what I was getting, and outside of Skyward Sword, I was never disappointed with any of these games. I can understand why Nintendo took the new open world approach to 3D Zelda, simply because there was a huge market for those style games, and it appears to be for some reason what most gamers want these days. Personally, I would rather not wander around in large barren environments, simply because if you play for long periods of time in smaller gaming worlds, each location is going to be more memorable to you as a player. I simply cannot see myself in 10 years from now being able to reflect as easily on any of the locations in Breath of the Wild as easily as say I could, for example, in Hyrule Town Square or Carico Village in the Ocarina of Time. In a world as big as Breath of the Wild, nothing is as memorable as it should be. Sometimes less is simply more. In general, I also feel that there are far too many open world sandbox games being released at the moment. It is a genre I'm bored to death of, quite frankly. There are so many games around today where you find yourself aimlessly running around large areas, side questing, going around on random killing sprees, looking at yourself as a bloody stupid triangle on a map moving from one mark to the next. This subgenre of gaming seems to be infecting every other area of gaming, and personally, I am sick and tired of it. I suppose it's human culture in general. Industries latch onto something that is successful, then ram it down our gullets until we are choking to death and won't buy it anymore. Like, I don't know about the rest of you, but I can no longer bear the sight of bloody superheroes or zombies anymore. If I see any media which features either of these mediums, then in all likelihood I will avoid said product at all costs. It's all become so cliche now. I can see with these big open worlds in gaming that it creates the illusion to the player that they can do anything, and you could perhaps argue the case that it gives the player more choices and freedom. However, perhaps this is just a little bit too much freedom for me personally. When playing games like this, I sometimes find myself feeling frazzled with choice paralysis. The game can become so overwhelming with so much to do, I sometimes struggle with which bits to tackle first. It's like when you go to a bloody restaurant with a huge menu and you waste more time picking the dish than actually eating bloody anything. I personally prefer more linear gaming experiences, like for example that of which I got in Zelda 2. Breath of the Wild changed things up by becoming the first 3D sandbox Zelda game. I much preferred the RPG elements introduced into the Adventure of Link instead. The combat in both of these games also introduced many new elements to the franchise. Let's start by looking at Zelda 2's combat. As mentioned earlier, the Adventure of Link introduced a new 2D side-scrolling format to the series. In my opinion, this greatly improved on the combat from the previous entries in the series. The simple system allows Link to slash high or low. He can also stand still and block incoming high attacks and crouch down to block low attacks. Combine this with the addition of an upwards and downwards jumping thrust, and you can have extremely intuitive battles for an 8-bit platformer. Combat is exemplified mostly in dungeons. Blue Knights in particular, for example, offer Link some tense battles. These gentlemen also toss a seemingly endless volley of knives at the player and randomly alternate between high and low throws. Blocking these projectiles while simultaneously trying to sneak Link's sword past their defense offers a lot of challenge, but makes it all the more rewarding when you manage to down one of these foes. Moments like these, paired with the suspenseful nature of edging your way through a temple with only a fraction of health remaining, can sometimes make this game feel extremely difficult. Zelda 2's level of difficulty is another factor in what makes the game perhaps less favourable to many others who have played the game. However, the difficulty in this game, combined with the fact that you are rewarded with experience points every time you down a foe, perhaps made this the most rewarding Zelda game to play of all for me personally. Battles in Breath of the Wild, though, can be equally difficult sometimes. For some bizarre reason, the extra layer of difficulty in this one is highly praised on the whole, rather than panned like it is in Zelda 2. Personally, I find that Breath of the Wild combat often more frustrating than it is rewarding. In relation to the combat in Breath of the Wild, it is an interesting note to notice that Breath of the Wild is billed as an open world sandbox game that promotes exploration. I often found the amount of deaths and constant one-hit KOs in this game a huge barrier and which would often hinder this experience. Take Mario 64 for example. That game was made in a big world to explore in back in the day, so due to this, Miyamoto chose to include a lot less enemies in this game than he would have done in previous Mario titles. How are you supposed to enjoy and explore this huge beautiful open world if bastards are one-hit KOing you all the time? Speaking of dying, I feel a sense of rage hit me every time I die too. This isn't due to the difficulty itself, or the fact that I feel cheated. This is due to the bloody load times. I hate waiting for the game to load up again every time I die. It's like insult to bloody injury, in which annoys me to no end. Dying regularly in retro games was fine back in the day, as there were no load times hindering us. So if we fell off our horses, we could get straight back on and get on with our lives. On occasion, some difficult new games have got this gameplay trope right though. Take Super Meat Boy for example. Constant deaths, but you instantly respawn every time you die, so you can just carry on trying that difficult challenge. That is good game design, unlike what we see with this part here. Speaking of the battles, apart from the one-hit KOs and really long load times, the final nail in the fun coffin for me is the bloody weapon system. I am never in the moment and enjoying these bloody fights because I am constantly feeling concerned about how long my weapon is going to last for. Sure, you normally get more weapons every time you down another foe, but you constantly have that nagging worry in your head that you are going to end up defenseless. Constantly losing weapons just isn't much fun for my reward cortex really. I'd much rather be chewing on some nice experience points instead. Yeah. In closing, Zelda 2 and Breath of the Wild both actually have a lot in common. Both games are difficult, they both have unique combat systems to the franchise, and they both bring completely new styles of play to the Zelda universe. It is interesting to me that despite these similarities, one of these games is deemed a masterpiece and the other is critically panned. I accept that I am in the minority of people who feel the opposite way about these two games, but this is why it is important to form your own opinions on the quality of games, rather than listening to corporate review scores. I am sure Breath of the Wild to many is probably close to a perfect game for them. However, for me personally, for the reasons I have mentioned in this video, this game does simply not tickle my fancy. If you are a regular viewer of my channel, you would know that in general, I prefer to play a lot of older games over modern ones, as I feel they suit more to my taste. Breath of the Wild, I suppose, exemplifies a few of the modern tropes in gaming that sometimes get on my nerves. Let me know in the comments section what critically acclaimed games you haven't enjoyed over the years. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe on this video, and I'll see you all again next week with some more retro gaming goodness. Cheerio! Thank you for watching today's video. Shout outs to Jarrett Tolzien, Mad 8 Productions, Andreas Larson, Peter Dawn, Mike Frost, Edward O'Reilly, Andrew Bazanski, and all of my other patrons. Thank you all for your support so much. Yeah! If you want to be added to this prestigious list, then check out my Patreon page. Ta-ta and farewell.